Welcome back to day 3 of our SolarPower Summit. I'm Walburga Hemmetsberger, CEO of SolarPower Europe, and I am the host of day 3. Now, in this session, we're going to talk about connecting the dots, about the grids, which are the backbone of our energy system. And I'm here with Naomi Gevillard, who is our senior policy advisor and expert when it comes to grids. Naomi, when we're talking about grids, grids have been very long time perceived as being able to hold maximum of 4% renewables in the system. So that was really something unimaginable to go beyond these 4%. Now we see in some member states that grids are carrying, or that renewables are powering basically whole full days with renewables, and grids can hold that. So grids are evolving, and I'm very curious to hear your discussions today with our distinguished panel on how grids are evolving and how our energy system can be powered 100% with renewables in the coming years. The floor is yours, and happy to follow the discussions. Great to have you all here.
Yes, thank you, Walburga, and indeed, welcome to this session on grids, following a week of debates on the present and the future of solar, of our industry, of solar energy, and of the solar industry. And indeed, today we're going to talk about one of the biggest challenges probably of the next years, the grids. So let me just first draw you a picture of what the energy system will be like in 2030, and bring you to that energy system of 2030. So first, we'll have an energy system more electrified. We'll see all sectors of the economy being increasingly electrified. That means transport with electric vehicles, that means heating in buildings, that also means industry, with as well the production of more fuels produced from electricity, synthetic fuels and hydrogen. That also means an increased penetration of renewables. We have published on Tuesday our assessment of the national energy and climate plans, and we see annual additions of 19 gigawatts per year of solar in Europe by 2030. Our own predictions see more growth towards 24 gigawatts annually in the next years, and I cannot avoid to mention the announcement of the IEA, which sees solar electricity becoming which sees solar becoming the first energy in Europe in 5 years. And finally, it's also increased decentralization with more small-scale renewables connected to the market, but also more active consumers with charging points at home connected to the system. So that really changes the picture for the energy system and for the grid, because we'll have to connect all of these new loads and all of these new assets to the grids. We already see in Europe that grid connection and having the necessary grid capacity becoming a challenge, with project not accessing grid connection or at high costs. But we'll also have to then integrate all of these loads with a system with more variable renewables. The Commission recently released its impact assessment, 2030 climate target impact assessment, where it says that renewable electricity will be from 55 to 60% of the electricity system by 2030 if we want to reach climate neutrality. So that's quite a program. We're happy to explore it with you, and very happy to explore it with our distinguished speakers, but also with you. You have the opportunity to participate to the discussion by asking questions through Slido. So we invite you to go to the website Slido, enter the code of this event, SolarPower Summit, and then you can easily submit your questions, and I will be happy to bring them to the panelists. But I am now very happy to introduce our distinguished panelists. So Mr. Joachim Balke, who is Head of Unit Networks and Regional Initiatives at the European Commission. we have as well Thorsten Knopp, who is head of European regulations and projects at Innogy, but also the chair of our grids workstream recently launched at SolarPower Europe. And finally, Dr. Giulia Badeda, who is head of the Department Hybrid Energy and Battery Storage Systems at Habowind. So welcome to you all. Without further ado, I would like to start the discussion with a bit of a broad question about an event that happened recently. So you should see on your screen now a couple of newspaper covers about what happened recently in California, where we have seen in August a series of blackouts. And the way that the press reported about these blackouts, or some newspapers reported about these blackouts, were along the lines of the concerns or the dangers that were related to the high penetration of renewables in the grids. So I would like to have your first reaction to this event, and maybe know what you think should be the lessons learned for Europe from this episode. So maybe starting with Joachim, first couple of words.
Okay, thanks a lot. First of all, first of all, I hope that you can hear me, and apologies for joining in this somehow limited and unconventional way by phone. So I cannot see your slides, but I'll try to join in the discussion like this. Perhaps first to say that indeed I think you summarized very well the challenges that we also see from the Commission side in moving to net zero by mid-century, what that means for the electricity system. I mean, you asked about California. Let's say I'm not a big expert on the Californian electricity system, but I mean it seems pretty obvious to me that if California has shown anything, then it is that the biggest risk to humanity at large and to our electricity supply more specifically comes from lack of efforts and lack of action to both mitigate climate change, but also, since it's already there, to adapt to it. So I think if there's one overarching lesson from California, it can only be that, I think, even if I admit I don't know the details of the power system there. But what I would say is that with the view to Europe, I think we do know that not only can our electricity system cope with high shares of variable renewables, but we know that it can. We have I think a lot of expertise for that. I think if there's anything where in Europe we can say we are the front runner, then it's precisely with that, in showing how to adapt the grid and the electricity system at large, so that we can accommodate an ever-increasing share of variable renewables, as is going to be a reality under any net zero scenario. And I think we know also what we need for that. We need indeed to adapt our infrastructure to make it both smarter and better interconnected, and I think we'll get more into detail on that. We also need to adapt the markets so that they send the right signals, in particular in terms of flexibility, to value it and help bring it into the market. And I think that's precisely what the clean energy package has been about. And then lastly, I think going forward, as we go to renewable shares, which are more in the variable renewable shares, which are more in the ballpark that you've mentioned earlier on, so sort of way beyond the 50 and perhaps even 60%. There, of course, then the question will have to be answered how we deal with, let's say, those, I would say, mid to longer term intervals where they might not be readily available. And I think that brings us very much to the question of system integration, which is basically our, I would say, the overall heading of our legislative program in the energy field that this Commission is going to deal with. So I think that would be my initial reaction to this introductory question. And once again, thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Joachim. So indeed, a couple of thoughts: climate change, the need to prepare better, and the infrastructure, the markets, and most importantly, to have a vision. Maybe now turning to you, Julia, your reaction to this episode in California. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, now I'm unmute. So thank you very much for having me in the conversation. California is indeed something where I expected that we get a lot of wind from the opposition of renewable energies, especially wind and solar. Yes, they are fluctuating, but this is why we have to talk about flexibilities, because flexibilities and a rather short-term reaction period, not the planning over a month, will be the future for our systems, for our grids. And if we would have planned in a different way, also in the Californian case, I think the Rocky Mountain Institute has a very interesting analysis on this. It would have worked out. And the reaction of California, if you looked at the news afterwards, was now installing 2 gigawatt-hours of battery storage systems to their grid, because they know that the combination of PV plus storage is much more cheaper than any gas peaker plant that they could operate within that system. And on the same side, with the respect to climate change, California sees a drought and a heat wave at the same time during this moment. And this meant that baseload plants and conventional power plants were not able to operate at this point of time. So we shouldn't push everything on the renewables. There was an opportunity there, and the grid operator learned from this. And this is something that we could take for the European system as well. We need more short-term flexibilities in our systems. And this means then, for me, a smarter grid.
All right, nice program indeed. So now turning to you, Thorsten, your reaction to this episode.
Thanks. Although it's a bit tempting, I'm not going to give any advice to the colleagues of PG&E how they should run their grid, because of course I don't know about the details, but I know a few of them, and I have a lot of respect for them, and they are facing enormous difficulties. But what I'd like to take a bit away from what the two of you said, from saying, is it renewables or is it conventional? To a different track and saying, are the problems that they are facing from distributed resources, or are they from centralized resources, which of course is very connected to that, because mostly, well, conventional resources are almost all centralized, and the renewable resources, most of them are decentralized. And I think it's a matter of centralized resources. The problems that they are facing with the availability, with system stability, with talking about rolling blackouts, are a problem of centralized resources. And so I think decentralized resources, and especially renewables, in intelligently managed grids, in maybe even, but I think we are a bit further there, in smart integrated energy systems, of different sizes, starting with very small ones and then getting larger and larger. They contribute to the resilience of the grid to a considerable extent. And that's why I think renewables and the integration of renewables makes indirectly the integration of distributed energy resources, but most of them, as far as generation is concerned, will be renewables. The integration of distributed energy resources makes a grid more stable if you run it properly, and if you organize it properly, and if you have the proper roles and responsibilities assigned. And then we'll increase resilience. And I think that's the way we also in Europe should go further, by examining the possibility to organize the whole energy system bottom up in small units that enable participation, but that also increase resilience. And that's a lesson I would learn by not really knowing the details, not judging anybody, but by looking from outside to the Californian situation and say, think about less about central structures, about a central solution, think about the decentralized structure, a decentralized solution, and of course then renewables will be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And what you need for that is roles, responsibilities, working smart grids, information, observability, digitalization, all that, and there we still have a way to go, definitely.
Okay, thank you for this point. I think indeed it's very interesting, the role of decentralized energy, and we'll come back to that in the discussion. But first, let me, I'd like to touch on a first topic which relates to grid investment. Because you mentioned the importance of investing in an infrastructure, on power infrastructure, but also a smart infrastructure. So I show you on the slide a graph that's coming from a recent publication from the Commission that dates from September, the EU-wide assessment of the NECPs, where you see more or less the level of investment, of annual investments that will be required in the grid in the next 10 years. So I help you read the graph. It's 59 billion euros to be invested in the power grids by 2030. So I'd like to turn to you, Joachim, to ask if, from your perspective, these investments are happening, how the EU can contribute to make this investment happening, and maybe are we doing enough to invest into power grid instead of other infrastructures, because we had last year a lot of criticism on the last PCI lists, where we still saw funding for gas and oil projects. So what can the EU do to contribute to these investments and to these investments?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. And indeed, I mean, let me perhaps just put it in a slightly wider context. It's clear that the steeper the curve gets, and I mean, we've just proposed to make it a bit steeper also in a 2030 perspective with the climate target plan. The higher the investment needs are going to be, and that is true for the whole energy system, where we've calculated sort of 260 billion additional for the current 2030 target, but up to 350 billion additional if we go to the higher 55% target. And as you said, that's also true in particular for the infrastructure sector, as you quoted, around about 60 billion investment per annum, which would basically double the average that we've had over the last decade. That's a tall order, no doubt. At the same time, these are sort of headline figures, which reveal sort of different investment needs, of course, in different countries. I would say that the level to which these investment needs, in particular in the grid, is spelled out in the NECPs differs from country to country. So we have some NECPs which make these needs very explicit. To quote Germany, for example, we all know that here in the country that at least Thorsten and me know best, there is a high need for grid investment both onshore and offshore. We have also seen that a country like Spain, for example, makes it very explicit in its NECP that there is a need to invest in additional infrastructure, basically to enhance interconnection both of the Spanish mainland with Europe, but also in particular the island territories. And that is sort of one of the I wouldn't say pet project, but it's one of the elements that we started to look at more in particular also from a European angle. How to better integrate the islands in our grids. Or let's say, I think now talking about our own instrument, the 10E regulation, I think we can say that if we look at the results of what has happened since 2013, so when the current framework came into place, the realization of projects of common interest has helped to let's say to create a more integrated energy system, And as I said in the beginning, I think we need to have both. We need to look at both the, let's say, the macro level, the interconnection of the transmission grids, as well as then the let's say, in particular, also the smartening of the distribution grids. Both are necessary. It's perhaps logical that sort of the instrument which we as Commission wield most directly, the 10E, looks in particular at these sort of cross-European infrastructures. That's in the nature of things. And here, just to say that I think we have been successful since 2013. 30 projects have been completed from the PCI list, and we'll complete another 75 we expect by 2022. And that should lead to ending the energy isolation of I think all countries. Just to mention in particular the Baltic states, Finland, Malta, but also projects which have helped better to interconnect both the Iberian Peninsula and islands with the continent. All of this helps directly with the, let's say, increasing the absorption capacity for renewables into the grid, and that has been underpinned by European finance from the Connecting Europe facility. We have already committed close to 4 billion. Only today we'll decide on the allocation of this year's CEF call, which will add another around about 1 billion euros to that bill. Nevertheless, looking at those numbers, of course, they are a small fraction of the overall investment needs, because here we're looking at aggregate numbers over the last MFF, and that compares to the 60 billion per annum. So it's also clear that basically, I mean, the key leverage for can the investment in grids actually happen remains with the regulatory framework as such, because that is ultimately what decides whether these investments are feasible. I just want to perhaps briefly, if you allow me, I've talked already a bit too long, but very briefly touch upon the issue of gas, because you've mentioned it. Are we investing in the wrong assets? Well, I would just like to point out that the current 10E policy basically was inaugurated in 2013 in a context where gas supply crisis had been a very imminent threat to the basically to people being able to heat their homes in some parts of Europe. But we have, thanks to precisely that policy, I think we have managed to come to a situation where the gas grid today is resilient, and whatever might be left in terms of missing links should be completed very, very soon. So that is a program which we see as having been completed by and large successfully, and that's also reflected in the fact that we have now much less gas PCIs than in the past. And I think the idea is to look into the future, and if we do that, I think then it's quite clear that the priorities will lie indeed in completing the electricity grid, both on the transmission level, but also, of course, to look at smart grids. And the other side of that is that if we look at net zero, as I said, system integration will be important, and that then points to the role of hydrogen and also potentially green gases, which I think we will also have to look at in the 10E review, which, as you know, is scheduled still for this year. Mm-hmm. Sorry if I've been a bit too long.
No, but you touched on very different points. Maybe, Thorsten, we talked about how the past of the 10E regulation and the future of the 10E regulation that will be reviewed. Maybe a reaction on how the 10E has worked and what needs to be changed?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think that it really is an important point. And Joachim also mentioned, of course, first of all, crucial is if you want to mobilize the capital for these investments, and that's huge, of course, and I agree. We have to be faster now if we want to have any chance of achieving the 55% objective by 2030. Then we have to accelerate considerably, and that requires investment. That requires investment also in the grids, and I'd say most of them in the distribution grids. That at least is our German perspective. And I think the scope of the figure mentioned here, about 80 billion a year annually, is in Europe, in the EU 27, is appropriate. And of course, as Joachim mentioned, you will not do that against the capital markets. So you need suitable national regulation that is offering a return on investment that's suitable in order to mobilize that capital on the national markets. I think there's no way. We are not going to state finance these investments. We need to draw on capital markets. So you need an attractive regulatory framework. But you also need more. This figure would be double, approximately double, if we would not go for user flexibility, smart grids, digitalization, observability. And that is crucial in order to limit grid investment not to a maximum amount that basically enables to integrate everything at all times, but to have smart solutions that have a result in an optimal level of grid investment and in an optimal integration of renewables, and especially solar. And for this, of course, we need smart grids in the field. We need them deployed. We need to make we need to advance. We need to really make things that we are still doing in R&D become a reality. We need to have blueprints that are rolled out, and not just in a single member state, but all over Europe or wherever they are appropriate. And that's where TENIN comes in. We know that there is, of course, a smart grid part of TENI, but we know it's, well, if I say it's tiny, it's an exaggeration. Now we have 6 smart grids projects at the moment. By the way, half of them, 3 out of 6, are in E.ON Group, and we have dozens and dozens of electricity and gas transmission lines, and their volume, of course, is also much larger. And I think we have to, with the revision of 10E, we have to address particular what can help the deployment of smart grids. I know we have to have a cross-border aspect there, and I know the Commission already has been open to say it doesn't have necessarily to be a physical line. It can also be a concept, but I think that this could be an accelerator. This could be an accelerator to accelerate the deployment and making smart grids real, and that of course also needs financial support for these, for some core key projects that enable other smart grids to become reality. Nobody's asking the Commission to fund all the smart grids in there from the 10E, well then of course build on the 10E from the Connecting Europe Facility program. But I think if you really want to have an optimal level of grid investment, if you want to have the smartness that we need, you need to have this initial spark and saying, this is not just experimental anymore, this is now becoming reality. And financial support would help. I think Connecting Europe Facility is the right tool to do that. And I think it should be appropriately recognized, and we should remove all the barriers to that in the revision of the 10E directive.
All right, so a lot of changing in the 10E. Maybe Joachim, any reaction to that, or Julia, if you want to add anything on that?
If I can add something.
Yeah, Julia, perhaps first, no?
Okay. So I think one important step that I see here is that the TSOs and DSOs are talking to each other and planning together, because I think optimal solution will have a thinking over the different grid levels, and then we find a better solution for everything, and also considering implementing the flexibilities that will be in the grid anyhow and will have private investment, like electric vehicles, heat pumps, battery storage in home storage systems, something like that. I heard Joachim talking about the island and island connections. I do see that a little bit critical because it seems to be like the only solution in some places. We are working in Greece, for example, and there are large-scale infrastructure projects planned now to interconnect all of these islands to the mainland. And in my opinion, in some cases, it doesn't make technical and economic sense to do so, because we already have a solution to provide hybrid systems to these islands. And so I would assume that we have to think about these different solutions on low voltage level, medium voltage level, and high voltage level together to find a better solution for the whole system. But I do agree that there are some infrastructure projects on the high voltage level and highest voltage level that are necessary, and the interconnection between the different countries is especially needed to have a more resilient grid.
So more integration of TSOs and DSOs, more investment into smart grids, integrate better the synergies with the new sources of flexibility. Joachim, will you have any reaction to that?
No, I think my obvious reaction to this is that I think I agree with all of what has been said, and I agree also certainly with what Thorsten Knoop has said about the relevance of the let's say the smartening of the grids on DSO level, and I think that is fully recognized. I think we have an interest that our specific instruments, the 10E, contributes to that where it's useful. So to the extent that those projects can have a real benefit from being within the 10E, I think it makes sense. At the same time, let's be clear that, if we look at the financing, we will have a number of instruments which will have a financial firepower which is X times higher. I would point in particular to the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and also to a certain extent to the Just Transition Fund, and which are going to be more managed, let's say, I would say in a manner more similar, let's say, to structural funds. So in a sense, they are going to be also perhaps more adapted to really more local projects. That being said, of course, it is in our interest as Commission that these funds will be used in a way that directly supports the clean energy transition, and that means, of course, that all the kind of investments that you've all mentioned as being key enablers in this context, also on a local level, could be quite relevant in this context.
Okay, so I think a number of positive messages, and we can only look forward to the publication of the new CEF, the entrance into force of the new CEF and the 10E regulation. But if you allow me, I will now switch to another topic which we already discussed, is related to the topic of flexibility, which is let's say, which could be an alternative to grid development, which we just discussed. So it is indeed acknowledged that we'll need more flexibility sources, but where will they come from? And we also discussed the potential of prosumers, of the number of active consumer which will have rooftop PV and storage. Can they be the provider of flexibility, or will they have limits in providing the flexibility we need? Maybe Julia, if you could say a few words on that.
Yeah, I think something that we should consider is the sheer amount of systems that are coming online. Yeah, so it's just the number of possible home storage systems and electric vehicles that will be in the grid, and it would be a pity if we're not using them, because they will contribute in the scale of gigawatts to the system. So it's not, we are always looking at them and it's like, oh yeah, they have 10 kilowatts for EV, or it's 3 kilowatts for a home storage system. But in the sheer sum, you just get millions of possible supplies that you can use. Then you have availability coefficient that you have to calculate in, but anyhow you are talking about gigawatts and terawatt hours of storage capacity that you could use. You could use demand side management from several sources on industrial side and on the prosumer side, so to say. I do think that this kind of flexibility markets are also a very valuable tool that we should use to keep the people connected to the grid and not letting them go off grid and using their energy just locally and getting into autarky. So this is something that I see for the future, that these kind of flexibility markets are also an incentive to provide the electricity further to the grid and being connected to it. something that I do think, and I'm still struggling with it, is what benefit do you get from larger scale battery storage systems, for example, on the medium voltage level that are not behind the meter? So what is the value of these kind of storage systems in the future? We do see markets right now that are emphasizing this, like the enhanced frequency response market in the UK, or the DS3 market in Ireland, evolving in gigawatts of large scale storage applications. We do see a development of co-developed projects with renewables plus storage on one side. For example, the innovation auction, it just came out yesterday with the results showing that PV plus battery storage is just 1 cent more expensive in this specific auction per kilowatt hour than a sole PV station. So I do consider that this will increase in the future, that you're thinking about these co-development projects where you have renewables and battery on the side and can deliver further flexibility. And we should use these kind of assets because they're less expensive than just the distributed energy.
Okay, so so a lot of potential on decentralized energy, but also large-scale assets that that have their role. Maybe Torsten on that topic of flexibility sources and the role of the place of prosumers. We cannot hear you.
Yes, I was force muted. Sure. I think we are, and that is directly at the heart of what we are doing in the workstream grids in Solar Power Europe. We are looking at organization of the contribution, of course, of solar in all its different sizes it has. I mean, I always say solar is the only generation that is there in all different sizes, and also on how they contribute for flexibility. And I think 2 points are important. One thing is the organization of what it is should be left, well, we say a technology agnostic approach. Basically, leave it to market parties. They have many more ideas than we as DSOs, for example, would have on how to combine flexibility. Leave it to them, whether they increase generation at a place or decrease it, or whether they do the opposite with consumption, or whether they integrate storage. Leave it to them. And I think that will unleash a creative dynamic for flexibility if you have the proper demand for flexibility, if you have the proper markets, if you have the proper products installed, that will then unleash this creative dynamics on the part of aggregators, or call them flexibility service providers. So that's one thing. There's much more possible than any of us can imagine by constructing it and saying, this is a PV and they have a storage, and what can they do? Leave it to competitive forces. Second thing is that I think energy transition should be structured bottom up through these optimized energy systems. And Julia mentioned better coordination also in planning, construction, and operation of grids between transmission and distribution grids. I'd go a step further. I'd say we need that integration in planning, construction, and operation of grids, also between electricity, gas, hydrogen in the future, heat, maybe, things like that. Maybe integrate aspects of mobility, whatever that is. And then, of course, we have to design this interplay between creative, dynamic, competitive market parties that somehow group flexibility, and also organizing and coordinating such integrated energy systems that will soon become very, very, very complex and might be difficult to coordinate them through a market-based mechanism. And that's where the idea comes in. If you want to have a coordinator, that will probably have to be a regulated role. If it's a regulated role, you might think about assigning electricity, gas, hydrogen, heat DSOs the role of system integration facilitator, for example. And if you don't get these things together, if you don't get the right amount of market and of competition and of creativity organizing flexibility properly, but say, oh no, we are only doing a planning approach, and I decide that that electric vehicles charged from a rooftop PV have to be able to switch off between that and that hour. That's not the way to do it. But you also need regulated, administered coordination of things, because otherwise they become too complex. And we need to fine-tune that between competition, creativity, and coordination on as a regulated role. And then we'll unleash flexibility, and then we'll also have this, as I said, that last sentence, that's what we are looking at in the work stream, how to integrate solar properly, which role solar can play, how it can play a role at different levels with different sizes, how it can work together with storage and when it cannot. What about flexible demand and solar and all that? And you need to fine-tune these two, and then you'll unleash all the potential there is.
Okay, so we need a framework with this mix of creativity, competition, markets. Maybe Julia, on that, which tool and what kind of frameworks would you see in Europe to unleash these flexibilities? There were a couple of things mentioned. You mentioned auctions. We mentioned flexibility markets. Yeah, is our framework ready? What else do we need to do?
Yeah, so what I think is, I totally agree with Thorsten that we shouldn't like describe it has to be a PV and a battery or something. What we should do is describe what kind of service we need. And if we describe the kind of service that we need, then we will find then the technology will come. Yeah, so the engineers are very, very creative. If I look at the opportunities that came up in the UK and in Ireland, that we're now discussing also for really milliseconds, 15 millisecond response times. Yeah, so there's totally new ideas how to provide this to the grid. And basically what they did, they described what is my issue in the grid right now, what is the problem that I want to solve, and then just open it to that someone can bid on this and find the right solution, and then you will get the most cost optimal solution. What we saw in the innovation auction, they described very clearly for what the storage should be and what you should do with the storage, and they didn't open like, please design the system that provides this amount of flexibility or whatever. They just said, do a storage for FRR, and then what you will see is not a really optimal solution for the future. That's my opinion, because now, yes, you get a cheaper price for a battery plus a PV system, but it's probably not designed in a way that you could use it for different services in the future as well. So I would recommend to go rather the step of describing what you need, describing this maybe in conjunction in all of the different countries, because yes, I know there are local problems, and in all of the different grids you will have different solutions, but at the same time there are similar problems in the grid. And so I think that we could find like a handful of products that could be placed there. You design a right framework, so investments will come because you understand how to build the system, and you understand how to do it in Germany, in Spain, in Greece, and wherever. And then you can roll out a business model for all of the markets, because right now in every market we find different frameworks, and then you have to recalculate, you have to redesign your system, and so on, which I think are some efficiency losses that we could avoid.
All right, thank you. I think it's very interesting what you just said. Maybe one message that I would like to remember is the creativity that you mentioned, the fact that there are a lot of innovation lying there, and that if we design the right frameworks, they will happen. What we need is just the framework, and maybe also a vision on what we need and where we want to go. Unfortunately, we're reaching the end of this event. So I will have to just ask you to a last question, just to wrap up. So please, just in one sentence, we talked about developing grids, we talked about developing flexibility. What do you think will be where do you think the EU will take more power, will take more competencies in these fields in the next 10 years? Will the EU finance more grids? Will the EU regulate more how we invest into grids? Will the EU regulate more how we operate flexibility markets? Maybe in one sentence, Joachim, then Torsten and Julia.
Very challenging, but if I have to pin it down, then I think I would say we should not focus too much on the role of the Commission or the EU as providing finance, because that would ultimately, in the majority, have to come from capital markets, but more on the role of the EU in, I would say, aligning regulatory frameworks and making sure that they are on a wholesale level harmonized, and on a lower level, at least insofar aligned as to allow an efficient rollout of the flexibility solutions at the right scale that colleagues have mentioned. So rather, I think on the regulatory side than on a sort of from a purely financial assistance perspective.
All right, Torsten, maybe?
I agree, and there are two steps that we should take now. Based on the clean energy package, we have the possibility to bring flexibility forward, but we'll only do that if we really focus on it and go forward, and that's why we need the new network code on distributed flexibility, and we need it soon. That's one step. And the other thing is more general. In designing the new framework based on the communication on smart sector integration, I'd love if the Commission would, beyond evaluating which energy can do what, would also focus more on that this should happen to a large extent at local and regional level. So give more focus in European legislation, in Europe, based on the on this communication on sector integration or energy system integration that's happening locally and regionally, and not just the technology approach.
All right, and last but not least, Julia.
Totally agreed to both what was said. So find the right definitions of distributed energy systems, find the right definition of batteries within our grid codes, find the right definition of flexibility opportunities, and define the responsibilities of all the participants in this new system. And then I think the ideas will come and the solutions will be there.
All right, thank you all for joining us in that debate. Very interesting topics. The discussion only starts, and we'll be happy to continue it with you. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks also from my side, the distinguished panel, and to you, Naomi, a lot of valuable insights. I hope also for you watching us behind your screens. I take in particular that we can save a lot of money if we're going smart, and that we can optimize the grid development, and also that storage, amongst others, will play a major role in our homes for making the system smarter and for optimizing the system. And this links very much, very well to our next session, which will start at 12 o'clock. So please dial in again and join us for getting more information about our first European market outlook on storage and residential storage, where we will answer your questions on how the residential storage market will evolve in Europe. So please turn on your video again and follow us as of 12 o'clock, where we will be back with residential storage to shed a light on that topic. Thanks very much.